What's up, guys? Welcome to May 24th as we dive into 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 54, the dedication of the temple. When Solomon finished making these prayers and petitions to the Lord, he stood up in front of the altar of the Lord, where he had been kneeling with his hands raised toward heaven. He stood and in a loud voice blessed the entire congregation of Israel. Praise the Lord who has given rest to his people Israel, just as he promised. Not one word has failed of all the wonderful promises he gave through his servant Moses. May the Lord our God be with us as he was with our ancestors. May he never leave us or abandon us. May he give us the desire to do his will in everything and to obey all the commands, decrees, and regulations that he gave our ancestors. And may these words that I have prayed in the presence of the Lord be before him constantly, day and night, so that the Lord our God may give justice to me and to his people Israel according to each day's deeds. Then people all over the earth will know that the Lord alone is God and there is no other. And may you be completely faithful to the Lord our God. May you always obey his decrees and commands just as you are doing today. Then the king and all Israel were with him offered sacrifices to the Lord. Solomon offered to the Lord a peace offering of 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep, 120,000 sheep and goats. And so the king and all the people of Israel dedicated the temple of the Lord. Then on that same day, the king consecrated the central area of the courtyard in front of the Lord's temple. He offered burnt offerings, grain offerings, and the fat of the peace offerings there, because the bronze altar in the Lord's presence was too small to hold all the burnt offerings, grain offerings, and the fat of the peace offerings. Then Solomon and all Israel celebrated the festival of the shelters in the presence of the Lord our God. A large congregation had gathered from as far away as Lebo-Hamath in the north and the brook of Egypt in the south. The celebration went on for 14 days in all, 7 days for the dedication of the altar and 7 days for the festival of shelters. After the festival was over, Solomon sent the people home. They blessed the king and went to their homes joyful and glad, because the Lord had been good to his servant David and to his people Israel. 2 Chronicles chapter 7. When Solomon finished praying, fire flashed down from heaven and burned up the burnt offerings and sacrifices, and the glorious presence of the Lord filled the temple. The priests could not enter the temple of the Lord because the glorious presence of the Lord filled it. When all the people of Israel saw the fire coming down and the glorious presence of the Lord filling the temple, they fell face down on the ground and worshipped and praised the Lord, saying, "He is good. His faithful love endures forever." Then the king and all the people offered sacrifices to the Lord. King Solomon offered a sacrifice of 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep and goats. And so the king and all the people dedicated the temple of God. The priests took their assigned positions, and so did the Levites who were singing, "His faithful love endures forever." They accompanied the singing with music from the instruments King David had made for praising the Lord. Across from the Levites, the priests blew the trumpets while all Israel stood. Solomon then consecrated the central area of the courtyard in front of the Lord's temple. He offered burnt offerings and the fat of the peace offerings there, because the bronze altar he had built could not hold all the burnt offerings, grain offerings, and sacrificial fat. For the next 7 days, Solomon and all Israel celebrated the festival of shelters. A large consecration had gathered from all as far away as Lebo-Hamath in the north and the brook of Egypt in the south. On the eighth day, they had a closing ceremony, for they had celebrated the dedication of the altar for 7 days and the festival of shelters for 7 days. Then at the end of the celebration, Solomon sent the people home. They were all joyful and glad because the Lord had been so good to good to David and to Solomon and to his people Israel. 1 Kings chapter 9, the Lord's response to Solomon. So Solomon finished building the temple of the Lord as well as the royal palace. He completed everything he had planned to do. Then the Lord appeared to Solomon a second time as he had done before at Gibeon. The Lord said to him, I have heard your prayer and your petition. I have set this temple apart to be holy. This place you have built where my name will be honored forever. I will always watch over it, for it is dear to my heart. As for you, if you follow me with integrity and godliness, as David your father did, obeying all my commands, decrees, and regulations, then I will establish the throne of your dynasty. Over Israel forever. For I made this promise to your father David, one of your descendants will always sit on the throne of Israel. But if you or your descendants abandon me and disobey the commands and decrees I have given you, and if you serve and worship other gods, then I will uproot Israel from this land that I have given them. I will reject this temple that I have made holy to honor my name. I will make Israel an object of mockery and ridicule among the nations, and though this temple is impressive now, all who pass by it will be appalled and will gasp in horror. They will ask, why did the Lord do such terrible things to this land and to this temple? And the answer will be, because his people abandoned the Lord their God, who brought their ancestors out of Egypt, and they worship other gods instead and bow down to them. This is why the Lord has brought all these disasters on them. Second Chronicles So Solomon finished the temple of the Lord as well as the royal palace. He completed everything he had planned to do in the construction of the temple and the palace. Then one night the Lord appeared to Solomon and said, I have heard your prayer, and I have chosen this temple as a place for making sacrifices. At times I might shut up the heavens so that no rain falls, or command grasshoppers to devour your crops, or send plagues among you. Then if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sins and restore their land. My eyes will be open and my ears attentive to every prayer made in this place, for I will have chosen this temple and set it apart to be holy, a place where my name will be honored forever. I will always watch over it, for it is dear to my heart. As for you, if you faithfully follow me as David your father did, obeying all my commands, decrees, and regulations, then I will establish the throne of your dynasty. For I made this covenant with your father David, when I said, one of your descendants will always rule over Israel. But if you or your descendants abandon me or disobey the decrees and commands I have given you, and if you serve and worship other gods, then I will uproot the people from this land that I have given them. I will reject this temple that I have made holy to honor my name. I will make it an object of mockery and ridicule among the nations. And though this temple is impressive now, all who pass by will be appalled. They will ask, why did the Lord do such terrible things to this land and to this temple? And the answer will be, because his people abandoned the Lord, the God of Israel, the God of their ancestors who brought them out of Egypt, and they worshipped other gods instead and bowed down to them. This is why he has brought all these disasters on them. 1 Kings, Solomon's agreement with Hiram. It took Solomon 20 years to build the Lord's temple in his own royal palace. At the end of that time, he gave 20 towns in the land of Gilead to King Hiram of Tyre. Hiram had previously provided all the cedar and cypress timber and gold that Solomon had requested. But when Hiram came from Tyre to see the towns Solomon had given him, he was not at all pleased with them. What kind of towns are these, my brother? He asked. So Hiram called the area Kabul, which means worthless, as as it is still known today. Nevertheless, Hiram paid Solomon 9,000 pounds of gold. And so that's the end for today. Yeah, the thing's like, sometimes I don't know, it's like sometimes we could be in a place in our life where we feel like God can't heal us. God will never be able to heal us because either we're just too sinful, or either because like God just too busy with other people's problems to be dealing with us. The thing is like verse 15 of Chronicles chapter 7. It says, "My eyes will be open and my ears attentive to every prayer made in this place." And the reason why that's so significant is because like it's like God does hear our prayers. We may not feel it. We don't. This is like the mystical ways. God works in mystical ways, in ways that we don't understand. But yeah, it's like we have to have the faith to know that God does hear our prayer, that God does care about what we have to send our prayers up to for, right? Because we can't just go into a mentality of saying, oh, God doesn't care about us, God doesn't hear us, because we don't experience any difference. Sometimes those differences that we experience, that we desire to experience, it takes time. It takes patience. And so yeah, it's like, don't be discouraged if you can't feel the presence of it. Don't be discouraged. Keep praising God in the midst of your uncertainties. Keep praising and worshiping. Keep praying to God. You know, it's like, it's just something that I've learned over this past year. It's like, don't just pray once. Keep praying to God. Because like God will hear your prayer. Not because like, not as like a way of like shoving something down God's throat, but just like show my commitment to God, saying, God, if you're willing, this will happen. God, if you're willing, if this is your desire for me, is to do for this to happen, please let it be so. You know, like keep praying. It's like it shows commitment towards our part. It's like saying like maybe we don't experience it right now, but we trust that God will finally deliver us from whatever prayers that we ask of Him. But like learning to be patient, learning to understand that God does hear our prayers and that He will react to it. He will act upon it. Maybe it's just in ways that we don't expect, you know, and stuff. And so I like the verse 14 before that. It says, "If my people will humble themselves and pray, I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sins and restore their land." That's just basic understanding when it comes to asking Jesus for forgiveness, asking God for forgiveness, is to realize that we cannot come to God with a heart posture of pride, a heart posture of dishonesty, with a heart posture of our own agendas. We have to humble ourselves, submit ourselves to God, if that's, and let God be the one to do what He does best, which is to try to make our life as easy as He can, you know. And when I say that, I do not mean like living like a luxurious house. I do not mean like living a comfortable life, you know. It's like that's not what I mean. I mean like living a life that's like very closely followed by God, very closely walking with God. And sometimes when we walk with God, we can feel miserable because not because of following God is miserable, but because this world that we live in is so against God. That whatever we say, whatever we do, that's for God. It could be ridiculed. Could be like, you could be called a hypocrite, like whatever. But that we have to keep walking with faith, keep walking with God in the midst of those trials of people denying us, of people saying, now you're stupid, like, or people say you're being a hypocrite, you know. And like later down it says how like, "For I have chosen this temple and set it apart to be holy, a place where my name will be honored forever. I will always watch over it. It is dear to my heart." That temple, like I said yesterday, is our heart posture. That temple is, if we want God to dwell within our hearts, we have to let Him. We have to humble ourselves before Him, for His Spirit to dwell within us. and make us holy from inside out. Right? It's like, and the thing is like God will always watch over those who are trying to follow Him to the best of their abilities, who are trying to do His will. It's like sometimes doing the will of God is overwhelming, but like realizing that God is up in heaven saying, "Great job, my faithful servant. You have done what I've asked of you." It's like I would rather have God say something like that to me over something like oh, ask you to do something, but because you are afraid of the earth, because you're afraid of the worldly things, you did not do my will. I mean, you could still pass, you could still go to heaven, but like you just barely pass. I don't want to be known as somebody who's like limps into heaven. You know what I mean? It's like I want to be like running to heaven, rejoice with the heaven rejoicing with me. Now I don't want to be someone who's just like barely walking on the line, barely walking on the side of heaven's line when it gets cut off between the heavens and the earthly things. I want to be beyond that line of doing all the things that God has asked me to do. But yeah, that's kind of what I have to share. Today's a shorter chapter, so but yeah, may you guys go and walk with God today.